You know, growing up as a kid, one of the questions that we are often asked by, like our aunts and uncles if they come over to the house, or, like adults that they want to get into a conversation with you as a kid, and they're not sure what to ask you, so they ask the question, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so as a kid, you're pretty impressionable. So depending on what has been happening in your life or what you've watched on TV or who's influencing you at the moment, the answer could be anything. But usually it's big, right? It's like, man, I want to be the president or I want to be a movie star, or I want to be a doctor or a professional athlete. And then we also begin playing these games of make-believe as kids, to where we pretend to be the person that we want to be. And it could be anything. I remember growing up, I love sport. Man, I still love sports. I love to play sports. I love to play with the guys in the neighborhood, like just pick up ball or football in a lot somewhere and just having fun. And while we're having fun, as kids, we would mimic professional athletes that we wanted to be. So somebody like Bryce Harper from the Philadelphia Phillies, go Phillies, right? You knew I was going to bring Philadelphia into it. Some of you Atlanta Braves fans are hating me right now. But anyway, we mimicked these different athletes and pretended to be them. But after a while in life, this life of make-believe or pretending seemed to fade into the background when we got into school and high school, because then stuff got real. We had to make the grade, right? We had to perform. It mattered what our grades were to our parents. And then we got into team sports, and some of the fun went away a little bit because now you had to win and it mattered. And so you got cut from teams if you didn't perform at a certain level, or you just sat the bench because you weren't good enough to play. And so you started to feel this pressure that I need to perform. And then, we get to college, or maybe not. Maybe we just jump into the workforce, and we're still trying to figure out who we want to be. But then after college or in the workforce, if you happen to get a good job, and then you are looked at as successful, maybe a little bit more successful than the person who didn't go to college or doesn't have a good job. And maybe they were slower out of the gate, and so they didn't seem quite as sharp or polished. And then if you do get a job that pays you handsomely, and you are able to afford the nicer things in life, then you look a little bit more successful than the person in a lower socioeconomic class. And then if you are really good at what you do and you achieve this status, maybe you're rewarded with the job of your dreams. Like, you made it. You got there. Maybe it's not exactly what you dreamed it would be or what you wanted to become as a kid, but you did certain things, and now you are the person that you have become because of the things that you did. And so my point in talking about all of that is that from as early as we can remember as kids, our culture tells us that we are what we do. How do I know that? Well, let's just remove from us all that we do, or the ability to do what we do. And what happens? We start grasping for meaning and for purpose, fail at something, or just have the thought of failing at something, and it crushes us. when our possessions go away, or when our money goes away, we lose our mind, we lose our security. And how about our health? When our health or well-being is impacted, we begin to wonder why that's happening, and am I good for anything? Completely unaware, our culture has lulled us into this belief that we are what we do. And as parents, look, as parents, we buy into this culture and we feed it to our kids. And when we raise them, hey, be all you can be. Do the best that you can and succeed in all that you do. And we sign them up for all kinds of sports and activities. And before we know it, all of our nights are booked and our weekends. Activity, advancement, and achievement, along with all of the pressure that comes with it, is the language of the day. And we all become very competent in that language. The problem is this: without knowing it, we have allowed the culture to get us to think we are what we do, and it robs us. It literally robs us of who we are called to be as people. And so we're in the middle of this series that we started a month ago called You by Design. It's a series on identity and who we are, and it's a series where we have attempted to lead you or direct you into this realm of self-knowledge, learning about yourself, a journey that we seldom lean into because we are always in motion. After all, we have a lot on our to-do lists, and we wake up in the morning with more on our list than we are able to accomplish in a given day. And so we really don't have time to stop and ask the question, who am I? Really? Who am I? And so for the first half of this series, we attempted to answer that question. Who are you? And it wasn't about what you think personally, your opinion of who you think you are. It's not even the opinion of the world around us. And it's not even the opinion of how you feel right now. We went to what God says about us from His Word. And we learned as human beings, all of us, we are image bearers of the living God, designed and created by Him, for Him, and to live in relationship with Him, bringing Him glory. And so that means we can't truly know who we are unless we know who God is. And the problem with that is that we have all, according to Scripture, we've all rebelled in living out the identity, the image that God has given us. But while we were living that way, chasing everything else, and some of you are still chasing other things for your identity, the Bible tells us that God, out of His love for us, sent Jesus. God in the flesh, who came and showed us how to perfectly live out the identity that has been given to us. And Jesus died on the cross, forgiving us all of our sin, rose again, and ushered in this new way of life. And so when each of us accept Him and surrender our life to Him, He makes us brand new. And He gives us a new identity where we shed all the old and the new comes on us and it's been given to us. It's what the Apostle Paul so succinctly says in Galatians 2:20. He says, I've been crucified with Christ, man. The old me is dead. And I no longer live, but Christ lives inside of me. And the life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. The old you is gone. If you're a follower of Jesus, the old you is gone. It's been put to death, and you're a child of God. You've been adopted into his family, forgiven, showered with his grace, blessed with every spiritual blessing in Jesus, and sealed for all of eternity. You will forever be a child of God when you trust Jesus. But while knowing that is foundational to your life, knowing who you are, there's another question, and today we're going to shift gears for the next 3 weeks. And this next question may be just as important as the first in knowing who you are. And there is more in the Bible that speaks about this question than we even realize, and it's the question, who are you becoming? So who are you becoming? Growing up in New Jersey, I loved to go to Atco Dragway. So it was a dragging strip in Atco, New Jersey. And my Uncle Bob, he was big into cars and racing, and so we would go watch him. My brother, my dad, and I, we'd go watch. And so we'd sit in the stands. We would cover our ears and watch race after race. And as kids, you would try pick out. We didn't know any of the drivers, but we would try and pick out the cars that we wanted to win. And usually it was the cars that were really flashy. They had all kinds of decor on the outside, and they had spent a lot of time making sure that their car looked amazing. But inevitably, there was a car that would show up at the racetrack, off the street, didn't have all the flash. And so and it would come up next to these other cars, and you would look at it and you're like, what is this guy doing? But then once he got off the starting gate, you knew that he knew what he was doing. Because he would outperform all the other cars. And so it was obvious where he was spending all of his money and time was under the hood. And in Christianity, it's the same way. We seem to spend a lot of our time on the outside and not paying any attention to what's under the hood. You see, when we were little kids and people asked us, hey, what do you want to become in life? Who do you want to be? Most all of us in the room or watching online, we didn't say, you know what? I want to be loving instead of hateful. I want to be patient instead of irritable. I want to be truthful instead of a liar. I want to be self-controlled instead of given to anger. I want to be generous instead of greedy. None of us answered that way. If we did, our Uncle and Aunt would say, oh, that's nice, little Johnny. No, we didn't answer that way. And second, when we started growing up, we got into this pressure. Do you ever embarrass your parents in public? Oh, what did they, they got into the behavior. They're like, hey, that's not going to happen again. They get you behind closed doors, and it's like, hey, that's not happening again. It was all focused on what you could see. You don't want to embarrass your parents, and you want to do all the right things. Our whole culture has been that way. It's shaped our entire life. But when you open the scriptures, it's interesting, that's not the focus of Jesus and of a Jesus follower. When Jesus came on the scene, he turned the religious world upside down. Because the religious world at that time, it was all about what you looked like and all about what you did. And Jesus knew. He exposed those religious leaders. He said, hey, you got some nice You look good on the outside. But under the hood, there's no substance there at all. There's no substance. Your heart is wicked. You might be doing all the right things, but you are not becoming the right kind of people. Now, interestingly enough, the church has bought into this. Because in most any church, in order to become a member, ask you 4 things. And 7 Marks isn't exempt from this. And so what we say in 7 Marks, it's covenant partnership. So we would say, okay, we want you to show up. That's attendance, gathering on Sunday. We want you to find community. Like we want you to get in a group. And we want you to volunteer somewhere. We want you to serve. And we want you to give financially of your resources to further the mission to take us forward. Look, those are all great things. Those aren't bad things. Those are great things. And I would tell you that I firmly believe that you ought to be engaged in the family of believers. You ought to be engaged in the mission. But here's the point. Those aren't the end. Those are a means to the end. It's about you becoming like Jesus. But we don't look at it, well, I came to church today, check. I was in group this week, check. I served with the kids this week, check. I gave, well, maybe I didn't give, but 3 out of 4 isn't bad, right? So that's 750 in baseball. But we start checking things off as if that means I'm a good Christian. But it is possible to check all the boxes of being a good church member, but not become who God has called you to become. In John Ortberg's book, The Life You've Always Wanted, he tells this story of a man he refers to as Hank in the beginning of his book. And although a regular churchgoer, Hank never seemed to change. He rolled in and rolled out. He rarely affirmed anyone. His native tongue was complaint about the music, about the communicator. He carried judgment and disapproval around like a ball in a chain. He just wasn't a very nice person. There's no Hanks at 7 Marks, right? No. Although a regular churchgoer, Hank never changed. He was showing up, but he wasn't changing. But what was more troubling, according to Ortberg in his book and telling the story, no one was surprised by it. Church members would just say, that's just Hank. That's just how he is. No one expected that Hank would or should progressively grow into the way of Jesus. See, Hank didn't have any substance under the hood of his life, and it was acceptable to all the other followers of Jesus around him. After all, his life is his life. And I think that accurately describes the church today, where we have turned living our identity into Jesus as an individual sport. And we'll talk about that next week. Where we don't want to be challenged or held accountable to look, live, and love like Jesus. Instead, we value achievement over character and activity over intimacy and behavior over the heart. Look, if I walked around these aisles and in this room or went to your house or you're watching it online and I asked you, hey, do you want to become like Jesus? Well, I'm the pastor, so you're not going to say, no, I don't. Most everybody in the room is going to say, absolutely, I want to be like Jesus. I want to become like Jesus. So here's the follow-up question. Are you? Are you becoming like Jesus? Really? Are you? Maybe there's even a better question that we can dial into this question. Who are you becoming by what you are doing? Who are you becoming by what you are doing? Because the primary goal of every Christ follower in living out their new identity in Jesus is to become like Jesus. So you have to ask yourself, what is helping you to be like Jesus, live like Jesus, and love like Jesus? And immediately we look for a list. We all do. I get it. I do too. We like to be able to jump into a task, finish it, check it off our list. But in becoming like Jesus, it's not about list checking. It's a lifelong journey. It's not automatic. It's not instant. It's not linear. You know, one of the more frustrating things as a pastor is that people, you're not a task list. Can't look at you and say, yeah, Tom, looks like you're where you should be. Check. Look around the room. You look like where you're supposed to be. Check. It's not like that. Like, all pastors look at metrics. All of us. Look at how many people are coming. We look at how our engagement in groups is, how many people are serving, volunteering around the room. We look at all those metrics, how our giving's doing. We look at all of those metrics. The hardest metric to determine or to measure is who are we becoming as a church, corporately, individually. For a church to become like Jesus, it involves the hard decision to choose differently than what the culture has programmed us to choose. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Luke chapter 10, if you have your Bibles, you can turn there, and we're going to start in verse 38. And this is a familiar story for those of you who have grown up in church. You've heard this story before. It's about two women and how they chose to engage with Jesus. And we begin in verse 38, and we read this. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. So in a way, you could see this as you opening up your life to Jesus. So Martha opened up her home to him. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha, the one who opened the home, was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Jesus enters their home, and there are two different responses to him. Martha welcomed Jesus into her home, but then she went to work focusing on everything else that needed to be done, making sure everything looked right, and evidently there was more to do than she could do because she was getting frustrated that her sister Mary was not helping, and she was focused on being at the feet of Jesus, which, by the way, was very significant because in that time, to be at the feet of someone was to be a disciple, to be at the feet of their rabbi. And so for Mary, in a very male-dominated culture, to sit at the feet of Jesus would have been a declaration. And not only that, it would have cut against the grain of the accepted norm, the accepted motion of the culture, contrary to the culture. The expectation, and you could even probably make the argument that the identity of Mary should have been for her to be busy, for her to be serving, for her to be doing everything that her counterpart Martha was doing. But she wasn't, and she didn't seem to be disturbed by the complaining of her sister Martha. She was doing the work of becoming. That's what Mary was doing. She was doing the work of becoming. She was doing what we call practicing the presence of Jesus. And the picture is so applicable to us today, where we get swept up into everything that has to be done in our day. Sometimes really, really good stuff. Often when I'm talking to people about being with Jesus, I get the same answers. Paul, you have no idea what my schedule is. You have no idea all the stuff that's on my plate. From the moment I open my eyes, it just hits me. And I am in motion, and I can't sit still. Maybe you can, Paul, but I can't sit still. If I sit still, I even fall asleep. So I got to keep rolling. And then even in the religious world, you have a lot of activity. I watch church members get angry because they get so much in motion, so much activity, and they start to look at other followers of Jesus, and they're not doing anything. And they get mad and judgmental, and that's exactly what we see in this story, by the way. Martha's ticked. She's ticked. She essentially said, Jesus, what the heck? Don't you see what's happening here? I'm doing all the work. And there's a lot of stuff on my list. We would say it a little bit different in our vernacular. Jesus, I know I'm supposed to be with you, but there's a lot of other stuff on my list that's way more important than you. We never say that out loud, but our entire life demonstrates that. I got a lot to do, and I don't have time. Don't misunderstand here. Jesus is not anti-doing. Okay, hear me. Jesus is not anti-doing. He is pro-becoming because he knows everything else in life is downstream from there. Who you are and who you are becoming informs the rest of your life. The Bible tells us that Martha was distracted. The idea here is that she was drawn away, preoccupied, being pulled in different directions. You ever feel like that? How about every day? We all get in that mode. And what happens? We elevate everything that we're doing other than being with Jesus. Sometimes really good stuff. And what I love in this, Jesus does not condemn her. That doesn't happen in this story, but rather he attempts to redirect her to doing the one needed and necessary thing from which all else flows, and that's to be with Jesus. In the modern day church, the term is discipleship or spiritual formation. It's working on what's under the hood of our life. It's more horsepower, if you want to say it that way. So how do we get more horsepower as followers of Jesus to become who Jesus is calling us to become? And before I give you some guidance here, I just have to say this, that your formation and my formation as a follower of Jesus will probably not look the same, because we are all very different. There is not a one-size-fits-all plan to being formed as a follower of Jesus. So what might work for me may not work for you. So I'm not going to guilt you into doing something that just doesn't work for you. That's not how you were wired. That's not how I was wired. So we have to go to school on who we are and how God created us to be. But while saying all of that, there are a couple core principles that I want to leave you with. As you figure out the plan for your life to become who Jesus wants you to become, first is this: choose to become who you already are in Jesus. Choose to become who you already are in Jesus. This is so foundational. I'm hoping that in this moment, a light goes on inside of you. To live the Christian life is impossible. It's impossible apart from Jesus. And then, as we've discussed in this series already, if you have trusted the person and work of Jesus for the forgiveness of your sin and surrendered your life to Him, He resides within you. And listen, you are a new creation. You are not becoming it. You are a new creation. You have to understand that's who you already are. Now the task is living into who you already are. You're not the old you anymore. One of the challenges with young couples after they get married, I've done a lot of premarital counseling, and I watch these young couples get married, and after they get married, they still keep living like they're a single person. And I'm like, that's not you anymore. That's done. You are married, so start living like a married person. And when you talk about coming to Jesus and following Jesus, a lot of people still live like they're not following Jesus. That person is dead. You are a new person, so live into the person that you already are. Do you have a past? Yes, but that does not define you anymore. Do you struggle in the present? Yes, you do struggle in the present. But greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. I love what John says in 1 John chapter 5. He said, we know that everyone who has been born of God does not keep on sinning. But he who was born of God protects him, and the evil one does not touch him. We know that we are from God. That's who you are if you've trusted Jesus. And the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. So to live in the knowledge of God and following Jesus, you are walking counter to the world. We know that we're from God, and the world lies in the power of the evil one. And we know that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding so that we may know Him who is true. And we are, watch, in Him who is true, in His Son Jesus Christ. He is the true God and eternal life. Listen, Christianity is not about proving yourself to Jesus. It's not. It is accepting who you already are and choosing to live into who you already are. And you do that by doing what Mary did, by choosing to be with Jesus. We all have people who we love to be with and would choose to be with if we could. You know who should be at the top of that list? Yeah, it's a Sunday school answer. Jesus. All right, let me help you out. He should be on the top of that list. And we choose to be with Him by, interestingly enough, doing something. You're like, wait a minute, aren't you contradicting yourself here? I thought you were supposed to be becoming, not doing, not focusing on doing. And so I'm not contradicting myself. I'm just simply saying to you to go to work on the substance of your life. What's under the hood? Because I promise you, taking care of that first impacts everything else in your life for the better. So how do I do that? By engaging in what we call spiritual practices. Now, right now, some of your eyes are glazing over. You're like, nah, I've heard this before. But hang with me. Why are you here today? You don't have to answer that out loud. Why are you here today? is it just the mode of life that you're in? Is it just because that's what you do on Sundays? You go to church? Or because you like the music, which I think's amazing? Or to hear me? Lord, I hope not. Why are you here? We come together not to check a box, not to be entertained. What we are doing here is a spiritual practice where we come together to worship the God of the universe. That's why we're in this building. It's a practice that moves our heart to be like Him. And I can go through everything that we do at 7 Marks. They are practices coming together in group. It is not the end. It is a means to the end. You come to group to practice the one another's. How do you love one another as followers of Jesus? Where else are you going to do that? Where else are you going to work on your patience? Maybe we get a year down the road and you say, I'm way more patient than I was last year. Oh, yeah? How do you know that? Where are you practicing that? You practice it with other people. This past year, you guys probably forget this by now, it's October. We started the year with the practice of Sabbath. Remember that? About carving out one day out of 7 to give it to the Lord. To stop, to rest, to delight, and to worship. We weren't giving you something else to do. We were trying to tell you, take something off your calendar. Stop redlining your calendar to where there's no room for Jesus. How's that going? I can tell you, I'll testify. I started off great. I have lost my Sabbath. About a month ago, I told my wife, I said, baby, I gotta capture it. I have to recapture this. And you know what I tell myself? There's just too much to do. Like there's too many deadlines I got to hit. I just got to get after it. I got to get on it. And then pretty soon, your days fill up, your hours fill up. Reading the Bible, it's not an obligatory task. It's not something that you check off. It's something it's a practice that helps you be with Jesus, that helps you hear what He's saying to you. Transformation of your life by Jesus is an intentional journey. It's in our name. 7 Marks is not just a name. It's our point of view. It's what you work on. Many of you don't know this, but on our website, 7markschurch.com/the number 7 marks, you'll find 7 modules there that help you, that are aimed at helping you become who Jesus wants you to become. Module 2 is practicing the lifestyle of Jesus, and I would encourage you. They're meant to do as a group or at least with a few people together, working on it together, working through each of those modules to become who God has called you to be. Today, we, after all these gatherings, the staff goes away for our annual retreat. We spend a couple days together, just growing together, talking about this family. Our wins this past year, our misses this past year. Hey, how are we doing? And then we set the pace for 2024. I love our staff. I know, I'm well aware that we are blessed to have the staff we do and this family. And while we work on all of that stuff, objectives for the future and all of that, as I've been warming up and praying about this retreat, I am convinced that the most important thing is that we become like Jesus. Yeah, there's a lot of objectives we can chase, but if there's anything else that comes before us becoming like Jesus, then we are shooting at the wrong target and we are shooting for less. And so I'm telling you in this family today, what I want for you more than I want anything is I want you to become like Jesus. I want you to become like him. But in order to become like him, you got to be intentional. And so make a decision today. Make a decision today that knowing who you are going to become like